So this past summer, I've served as a student chaplain at the Cleveland Clinic, which brought a lot of new experiences. I was able to visit with patients. I collaborated with the medical team in order to give top quality care, and I learned how to use a pager. Turns out they still use those in the hospital. Who knew? And while many of the patients were in good spirits, they were happy about their stay at the hospital, there were also patients who were suffering in a profound way. I remember I visited this one teenage girl who had a neurological disorder which caused it so that even the lightest of touches would feel very painful for her. And while I was visiting with her and her mother, the nurses came in to draw blood. And so her mother and I, we sat there as this girl went through a pretty profound suffering as the blood was being drawn through the needles. And I felt so helpless. You know, there was nothing I could do to ease her suffering. A man, he told me about the experience of having his father die in his arms and how he felt so helpless, that he didn't know what he should be doing. You know, he had been trying to help his father to stand up and didn't even realize, that his father passed away. And then in his shock when he realized his father was dead, he became fixated on this idea, what am I supposed to do right now? And the hospice nurse wasn't there, so they called them and they told him, well, you can lay the body down and put a pillow under his head, cover him with a blanket. And he did that, and it calmed him down. But he and his wife, they felt so helpless at the death of his father. And they were just desperate to be told what they should do so that they could do something. And so I think all of us, when we encounter this profound suffering, this profound loss, I think we all feel helpless. And we don't just feel helpless, but we are helpless. Suffering and death, it comes for all of us. And there's nothing we can do to stop it. And this helplessness, it sucks. It's an awful feeling. And it's not foreign to the author of our gospel today. The Gospel of Mark, it's addressed to the Roman church during a persecution. There had been a great fire in Rome, and the rumor was that the emperor had started the fire so he could build a new palace for himself. And so, 2/3 of the city had been destroyed, and so the emperor, in fear for his life, he blamed it on the Christians. And so this anger for all the destruction, all the death of this great fire came upon the Christians, and there was a terrible persecution. Many people were put to death in pretty gruesome ways. And so the Christians, they found themselves to be helpless before the hatred of the Romans. They were in constant fear of being found out wherever they went, to go buy food, to go to the public baths. If they were found out that they were Christians, they would have been put to death. And so now I invite you to imagine that Mark, the author of the gospel, he had just witnessed the crucifixion of St. Peter. His mentor, his friend, his confidant had just been put to death, in this most brutal way. I mean, he must be devastated. He must have felt helpless in the face of such horror. And all the Christians, they all must have been wondering, what are we supposed to do? What can I do? And so then imagine that one of the Christians, he can't stand the silence anymore, that he can't stand this feeling of helplessness. And so he tries to get rid of it. He says, well, now Peter's in heaven, so really we should be happy now. I mean, if that Christian had said that to me about my friend, I would be so angry with that person. I would want to say, my friend has been tortured and killed. Let me mourn. My suffering is real. Don't try to tell me that I shouldn't feel sad. That Mark, experienced suffering like that he had a profound experience of suffering, I think that's evident in our gospel today. Right? So in the gospel, Peter, he names Jesus the Christ, the anointed Savior sent by God. But then Jesus, he tells the apostles, don't talk about that. Instead, he wants them to know that he has come to suffer and die. Jesus, he's the glorified Christ sent from God, and he will suffer and die. All will suffer. And the resurrection of Christ, the salvation that he offers us through the church, it doesn't take that reality away. And even though Christ himself experienced that helplessness, it still feels awful to us. And I think we all experience a strong temptation to be like Peter. To not want to come to grips with this helplessness that we feel before suffering. We might try to avoid it by not talking about the death of a loved one that's going to come very soon. Or we might try to distract ourselves by doing something, by talking to the hospice. What am I supposed to do? What are the next steps? Or we might try to make it disappear by saying something nice about heaven and angels. But Jesus, he clearly tells Peter and us not to do that. Instead, he invites us to really feel the pain and the hurt that happens to us in this life, to enter into the depth of it, to know our own need for salvation. And though we might feel it, might fear it, as painful as it might be, when we embrace suffering and our own helplessness, we will find Christ in that pain, not taking it away, but sharing in it, bearing it alongside ourselves. For he is Emmanuel, God with us.